Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. At least one river has burst its banks. Homes have been evacuated and tens of thousands are still without power as Storm Franklin becomes the third named storm to hit the UK in a week. If you're heading out to work this morning, then check first because of a number of train operators have cancelled services and are telling passengers not to travel. It's Monday, the 21st of February.
And I'm live in County Antrim, where gale force winds have prompted a risk to life warning as Ireland north and south takes another hammering from another storm.
More than 200 flood warnings are in place around the UK also this morning. Living with COVID, the Prime Minister is today expected to announce the end of all remaining coronavirus restrictions in England.
A last-ditch hope for diplomacy on Ukraine. The White House confirms President Joe Biden has agreed in principle to a summit with President Vladimir Putin. We await word from the Kremlin.
But America's most senior diplomat says they believe Russia has already decided to invade Ukraine. The satellite imagery shows more troops and armour massing at the border.
I'm live at Windsor Castle as the Queen plans to keep working through COVID, as Buckingham Palace say that she'll carry out light duties this week.
I didn't start SBTV to make money. I started SBTV because it was a passion.
A pioneer who changed the landscape of both music and media, SBTV founder Jamal Edwards dies at the age of 31. Also coming up on the programme for you, wherever you're watching around the world today, we'll speak to this 9-year-old who's had to learn to walk again after suffering from long COVID. And after gold and silver medals in curling, is it enough to make up for a disappointing Winter Olympics? We'll ask the chair of UK Sport, Dame Catherine Granger. Good morning, everybody. The third named storm in a week is battering the UK this morning. At least one river has burst its banks. Thousands of homes are without power and train operators in many parts of the country have cancelled services and are telling travellers to stay at home. The worst of the weather is currently over Northern Ireland. Let's find out more, should we? David standing by for us at Portrush in County Antrim. Good morning, David. I'll shout so you can hear me. What's it like there?
Well, you'll not be doing any sailing or playing any golf on the north coast of Northern Ireland this morning. Storm Franklin hit the west coast of this island late last night. At one point, 7 different counties in the Republic of Ireland were subject to an orange warning. They were recording waves of 42 feet out in the Atlantic and a wind speed of around 87 miles per hour off Galway. So needless to say, that had a significant impact on flights coming in and out of Shannon Airport. Some were grounded and others were diverted to Dublin. Now, Donegal on the northwest corner of the island was bearing the brunt of the storm, but it's now making its way eastward across Northern Ireland, where an amber alert is in place, meaning there is still a risk to life. The police service of Northern Ireland are warning people it's going to be a very difficult commute, and it's a similar picture really right across the United Kingdom. We've had some pictures from Scotland, for example, Ardrossan Harbour, where the waves are crashing right onto the promenade. Ferry crossings from Belfast to Scotland and from Belfast to Liverpool have already been suspended. And of course, England doesn't escape this either. There are 2 severe flood warnings in place around Manchester. Field operatives at the Didsbury flood basin have also posted some pictures from there, and the Environment Agency is urging people to follow all advice and to evacuate immediately if they're asked. to do so. The other big problem, of course, is fallen trees, with roads blocked right across the UK and Ireland. Those trees would have been weakened by the two previous storms, and several of them have now been uprooted. The fire service in the Midlands says 2 people had a very lucky escape when a tree fell on their car near Sutton Park. So as the storm continues to really blow here in County Antrim, the message is very simple from the police service: don't travel unless you really have to, and if you must make a journey this morning, do so with extreme caution.
OK, David, keep well, keep safe, thank you. Well, this is the latest warning from the Met Office. As you can see, it covers most of the country. Winds from Storm Franklin bringing possible disruption first thing before easing through the day. A Met Office amber wind warning covers parts of Northern Ireland until about now, actually, where damaging 80-mile-an-hour gusts are possible. A yellow warning covers more of the UK until lunchtime, where guests will widely reach, some 50 to 60 miles an hour gusts, I should say, locally higher. Ireland has similar warnings. Train services across the country set for another day of delays and cancellations as well. A number of train operators across the UK telling passengers not to travel today without being very aware of what's going on. Others urging only essential travel and warning of further delays and cancellations due to blocked lines from Storm Franklin. Passengers are urged to contact their local operator before setting out. We'll have more on that. In fact, the Minister's with us, so why don't we put that to him along with lots of other things. Paul Scully, hello.
Morning.
It's good to see you this morning.
Kate.
Thank you. 3 named storms in a week. How worried are we?
Well, I think it's been extraordinary, hasn't it? It's been an extraordinary week. I was in Glasgow on Tuesday on business, and when Storm Dudley hit, and then obviously back in London to enjoy Storm Eunice, and now poor people in the north, especially around Mersey, where there's flood warnings in Didsbury and Northerton areas. They're getting a battering, but the emergency services are working incredibly hard to make sure that those people who are off supply for their energy are being put back on again, and they've done remarkably well. But it's important that people stay safe, look at the flood warnings, and get the best advice.
Something else I want to talk to you about is COVID, of course. We're told that the PM will relax COVID rules this week. What's the science behind that decision? So
the Prime Minister is meeting the Cabinet this morning to look through and get that balance right. So we can see that infections are coming down quite rapidly, that the hospitalisations and deaths are following as well. They tend to lag behind, obviously, the case numbers, but nonetheless, you can see the trend within that. He'll be looking at the best advice possible, but getting the balance right, because it's important that we don't work and live under government diktat for a moment longer than is necessary, to allow the economy to recover, to allow people to get back to a sense of normality, whilst keeping people safe, clearly.
Will the changes come into effect this week? It's Thursday, Friday, isn't it?
Well, that's for the Prime Minister to announce later on. I mean, the regulations fall away in about 3 weeks' time anyway, 22nd of March.
We brought it forward a month.
But the Prime Minister will make his announcement later on. Now, that final decision hasn't been taken.
OK. As of then, it looks as though even if you test positive for COVID, you don't have to self-isolate legally.
So that will be, well, again, that decision will be taken later on, so we'll see the guidance around that. But there will be a point when all of this is falling away, and so it will come back to employers and employees to make those decisions for themselves, but we'll see the guidance that comes out later.
If a member of your team next week, say, if this comes into effect Thursday, Friday, next week, if a member of your team tests positive for COVID, would you tell them to stay at home or come to work? I
mean, I would say that, like any illness, frankly, any transmissible illness, you would say stay at home. I mean, that's you know, if you had a flu or something like that, you'd normally expect people to take the view, but it would be down to themselves or down to their employer.
Yeah, that's the problem, though, isn't it? Because you're a responsible employer and you would say to your staff, stay at home and get well. But if somebody's working on a construction site or, an industry that is sensitive to the number of staff that is there, they're going to feel under pressure to go to work, aren't they?
There is this, and this is why we need to make sure that we've got really good guidance for employers. But as I say, there comes a time when the pandemic moves to more of an endemic approach to COVID, in the same way flu and other viruses are treated. And that's what we've got to get back to. But it's a fine balance, clearly, and that's why Cabinet's meeting this morning, to go through the science, to go through that balance and debate it, and then obviously the Prime Minister come before Parliament to make his announcement.
I understand, but as a government minister, you know, as a responsible employer, as of today, you would say to somebody, if they test positive for COVID, probably they should stay at home so that they don't spread it, no matter what the rules are.
I mean, as of today, that is the rules. So
Well,
we'll
from
see
next week.
But we'll see what happens, because I don't even know when the date is that the Prime Minister's going to announce.
Whenever he
because the
relaxes the
decision
rules.
hasn't been. Well, then we'll see what the guidance is, because, as I say, you can't just preempt what he's going to say.
Because get rid of all the rules.
But it depends on the date, because you can see that the case numbers are coming down quite significantly, and if they carry on that same trajectory, by the time you get to the 22nd of March, anyway, they will be at a comparatively low rate. We're also dealing with predominantly a variant that's a lot milder than previous variants. That doesn't mean we can be complacent, because what we are saying is that COVID hasn't gone away. We're talking about balance, because we're still living with COVID.
Yeah, but what about those that are most vulnerable in our society? I mean, we know of a 95-year-old lady who lives in a castle, you know, and every COVID restriction is taken to keep her safe, and she still contracted it.
She will, and this will happen, and she's still working, but she's working from home, she's working in isolation, and that's exactly what we're talking about, learning to live with COVID. There comes a point at some time when we're able to do that. We're able to give as many people back their freedoms as possible. As many people to go about their business, and including allowing the economy to recover. But that can't be at the expense of human life and human well-being. But we've got to get that balance absolutely right.
But if you're pressured by your employer to go to work and you feel that you shouldn't, do you think that, you know, as an employee, you have a right to say, no, I don't want to spread this virus any more than it is, so I'm going to stay at home?
Yeah, I mean, look, every employer has a statutory duty to their employees. That is the case whether it's COVID, whether it's any other disease or any other ailment. I would encourage any employee that is in that situation to approach ACAS, to go on the ACAS website, and to follow through complaints through that way, because employers, no matter what it is, have a statutory duty.
Interestingly, the unions, the big three unions, frontline doctors, all saying it's reckless, utter lunacy, and a super spreader free-for-all. Why are they all wrong, do you think?
I just think it's a balance that I was talking about, and clearly the unions and the other people that you describe sit in they have their balance in a different place. What we've always said is that we don't want to have a moment longer than we need to have government dictating how people run their lives.
And what's the rationale about getting rid of free tests? Because if we don't have free tests, people won't spend 35 quid on a box of tests, so we won't know if there are any variants or whatever.
So what we're going to do is, either way, we'll have a level of surveillance so we can check for variants, we can check to see what's going on. But nonetheless, you saw the Prime Minister yesterday talking about the fact that we can't continue forevermore spending £2 billion a month on tests. And if you think what might that £2 billion might go towards, there's a lot of other backlogs in the NHS, other illnesses in the NHS that money could otherwise go for. So for every person that's worried about a test, there may be another person that's worried about a cancer diagnosis, for example.
Do we know when the free tests are going?
Again, no, the Prime Minister will make his statement later on.
Talk to me about what's happening with Ukraine. Are we closer or further away from the invasion this morning than we were yesterday?
Well, I'm not sure about yesterday, but there is the clear signs that that there are still troop movements on the border. There's 7,000 more troops than there were just a few days ago, despite the Russians trying to signal the fact that they were pulling away from the border. So there is a very, very credible threat, and that's why we've got to continue to be vigilant. We've got to continue to work with Ukraine and Poland, as Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, was doing just this week. And it's important that Vladimir Putin comes to we engage in diplomatic approach to this, because otherwise the loss of life will be horrendous.
OK. I've seen some of these tanks with Z written on the side. Do we know what that is?
I don't know.
No, I don't know either. Lots of papers are reflecting on that today. I'm sure it'll become apparent in the fullness of time. how much do we have to take our hat off to the soft diplomacy from President Macron, who again was on the phone yesterday to President Putin for almost 2 hours? And it does look as though we might potentially be heading towards some sort of summit between the Americans and the Russians as a direct result of President Macron getting involved.
I think what's really good is that all of the NATO countries are working closely together on this, so they're all playing leading roles in making sure that we can diffuse the situation, and hopefully, therefore, Vladimir Putin will step back from that situation, which, as I say, will be pretty horrendous.
But he does seem to be doing, Macron seems to be far more effective than we are. I just wondered why that was.
No, I'm not sure that's right. I think
our Foreign Secretary was, she was snubbed when she went to Moscow.
That's because she's saying things that aren't really palatable to the Russian Foreign Minister. Things he doesn't want to hear. So Foreign Secretary.
That's diplomacy, though. But I think the French are doing it in a different way and getting much further than we do.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think you have to say the good with the bad. You have to say the things that they don't want to hear, but then you have to give people a way out. That's just diplomacy. That you never cut their retreat. And I hope, therefore, both of those approaches that come together alongside the Foreign Secretary's work with Poland and Ukraine and the Prime Minister being in the Security Conference in Munich will actually bear fruit, and Vladimir Putin will come to see that it's right to step back.
We know that we've moved Brits out of the embassy for now in Kiev, moved them away to a different part of the country. We also know that the Americans have moved their embassy staff from Moscow for now. What are we going to do?
I'm not privy to those conversations. I'm a business minister, not a Foreign Office minister, so I know.
But you know quite a lot about cyber attacks, though, don't you? How worried are we about cyber attacks?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a real threat. That's a real threat. I mean, we've already seen a lot of work that's, they're worried about cyber attacks, particularly in Ukraine, but that could easily be spread further around Europe. And so these are.
How worried are we about them in the UK?
Well, we will be dealing with those, with the National Cyber Security Centre, and I'd push out messages to any business to make sure that they've got adequate protection, whether software and hardware.
OK, so we haven't had any that we need to worry about as of the last couple of weeks when the tensions have been heightened.
Well, there's nothing I can report on
that you've been aware of. OK, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you a couple of things. Firstly, about Her Majesty and how do we know how she is?
I don't know, but I wish her all the best. I do understand that she's still working at home, and as we were talking earlier on about COVID and what would happen if you get it. It seems, from the reports that I'm hearing, that they're relatively mild symptoms, and I hope that is exactly how it stays until she's better.
Yeah, as do we all. 95 years young. She looks amazing still, doesn't she? Tiny, tiny, tiny. You can put her in your pocket. She's amazing. Just before we let you go, obviously the Downing Street party question. If the Prem gets a fixed penalty notice, should he stay on?
I think there's not much moved on, to be fair, since last time I spoke to you. I think what we want to do is see what happens with the police action and the police report, see what happens with the Sue Gray report, and then look at it in the round. What we've got to be... I've always said I'd treat it a real high bar to get rid of any Prime Minister.
What about if they break the law?
Because I think we just need to see it in the round. That's why I want to see it.
Yeah, but if a PM breaks the law or misguides Parliament, misleads Parliament, how can he stay?
Well, I think it needs. I need to see context. I absolutely need to see context before I make any decision, and I think that's right because. But I understand this is. I understand this is one that's not actually being investigated.
Not by the police.
The pictures that we're looking at.
Not by the
here.
police.
So, in terms of law breaking, that's not going to be. That's not going to reach the threshold of evidence. But nonetheless, that's what I mean about context. That's why I want to see the Sue Gray report, see what the police find, and then we can work through have that conversation at that point.
Yeah, but people singing "Happy Birthday" in the cabinet room with your interior designer there,
But that's why I want to see. I'm not going to. There's not a lot I can add until from.
But my question to start with was very straightforward. It wasn't about any of the pictures that we're showing. It was about if the police have decided that he's broken the law and he gets a fixed penalty notice, do we have a Prime Minister in place who has broken the law?
Well, I'm gonna wait until I see context before I really make any more judgment on it.
It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining
Thanks,
us. Thank you. Quick look at what the papers are doing. The Times leads with the impending removal of final COVID restrictions. Just talking about that with the Minister, weren't we? In England, highlighting what it calls the pride of Boris Johnson in the move. The Guardian has news that last-ditch efforts to avert a Russian invasion of Ukraine are taking place. That's led by President Macron of France. More details of that have since emerged overnight. The FT leads on the announcement that 30,000 Russian troops will stay in Belarus indefinitely, adding to Western fears of an invasion. And one keeps calm and carries on, the front page on the Metro, after the Queen tests positive for COVID-19. The White House says Joe Biden has agreed in principle to meet the Russian President Vladimir Putin for a summit over Ukraine. But recent satellite imagery shows a new build-up of Russian troops and armoured vehicles on the Ukrainian border. And the US says it believes President Putin has already taken the decision to invade. Has he? Let's bring in Deborah. She's in Kiev, has been over the last couple of weeks for us. Morning to you, Deborah. How does it feel where you are?
Well, right now is the window that Western officials have been saying is when they believed Vladimir Putin would attack. And so you can imagine that people have been pretty thinking a lot about it. There's not panic in the streets, but talking to residents, no one's ignoring the reality that you've got the President of the United States, who said very starkly that he believed a decision had been taken, an invasion would happen, it will happen this week, and Kiev would be targeted. But obviously, unless and until the troops start, the tanks start rolling and the airstrikes start falling, there is still hope for diplomacy. And it is quite significant what's been happening overnight. Like you mentioned, President Macron working the phones and managing to achieve potentially a summit between President Biden and President Putin. We've heard from the White House, haven't we, that they've said that the US President has agreed in principle to this. We've yet to hear anything from the Kremlin, and Joe Biden has said that a summit would only happen if an invasion doesn't happen. And we don't know details about any summit either. It's been described as notional at the moment, and something that the US and the Russian foreign ministers would sort of hammer out. They've got a meeting planned on Thursday. But all this diplomacy really does hinge on an invasion not happening. And it's all taking place while in the east of the country there is still that escalation of fighting over the line of contact between the Russia-backed separatists on one side, Ukrainian forces on the other. There's been this spike in disinformation, attempts, according to Western officials, to create a pretext blamed on the Ukrainian armed forces that would give Russia the excuse to invade. So still incredibly tense, but still a chance for a diplomatic dial down.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Queen's isolating at Windsor this morning after testing positive for COVID-19. Buckingham Palace says the monarch is experiencing mild symptoms and that she hopes to keep carrying out what they call light duties. Ali's there for us this morning. Ali, good morning. Good morning. How's she doing?
Well, she is resting here at Windsor Castle, and this is obviously the place, Kay, where she spent so much of the pandemic surrounded by HMS Bubble, that small group of royal household staff. And there was great effort taken, of course, to protect the Queen. But as society has opened up, that has become more difficult. And we know that she has tested positive, but we also know that she has had mild cold-like symptoms, and crucially that she will be carrying on with light duties. Yesterday, for example, soon after the news that she had tested positive, there was a message posted on social media by the Queen congratulating the Team GB curling team. So that's the sort of light duty I suspect that we will see her carrying out over the coming days. She's going to be looked after by the team of physicians here at Windsor Castle. She will be isolating. She is not someone who likes a fuss, but I think inevitably she is 95 years old, nearly 96. There is always an unease that comes with any health issues that the Queen has. So I think, of course, there will be some concern, and there have been plenty of well-wishers wishing her the best. We know that she was told to rest by doctors after spending a night in hospital back in October. We saw her earlier this month marking the platinum Platinum Jubilee, in Sandringham, where she welcomed people. That was the biggest event that we had seen her hold for a few months. So that was a significant moment, but I think she will want the focus to stay on that remarkable 70 years that she has spent on the throne. She will want the focus to be on the Platinum Jubilee and the royal household, saying that she has mild symptoms and wanting, I think, really to get across a message of reassurance that she will carry on with work and that she will be carrying out light duties over the next few days.
Hello everybody, our top stories for you this morning. Listen up, weather warnings are in place across the UK as Storm Franklin brings yet more torrential rain and gale force winds. The White House agrees in principle to a summit with Vladimir Putin so long as Russia does not invade Ukraine. And the Prime Minister prepares to address Parliament later on today regarding his plans to remove England's remaining COVID restrictions. More on that now, and the legal duty to self-isolate could end later this week when Boris Johnson lifts all remaining COVID restrictions. Earlier, I asked the Business Minister Paul Scully about the announcement. He told me the government doesn't want to dictate how people live their lives for longer than required.
The Prime Minister is meeting the Cabinet this morning to look through and get that balance right. So we can see that infections are coming down quite rapidly, that the hospitalisations and deaths are following as well. They tend to lag behind, obviously, the case numbers, but nonetheless you can see the trend within that. He'll be looking at the best advice possible, but getting the balance right, because it's important that we don't work and live under government diktat for a moment longer than is necessary, to allow the economy to recover, to allow people to get back to a sense of normality, whilst keeping people safe, clearly.
Tamara's here, and he went on to say that if your employer is forcing you to go to work, even though you feel that you might have COVID, then there are options to go to ACAS. I mean, who's going to do that?
Yeah, well, a lot of people aren't going to do that. I think you can get a sense of the message that Boris Johnson's going to be giving when he goes to Parliament this afternoon after agreeing this plan with his cabinet this morning. He's going to be saying we can protect ourselves without losing our freedoms. This idea that government diktat, as Paul Scully put it, mustn't last any moment longer than is necessary. And Tory backbenchers are going to like that. A lot of them don't like the idea of the government intervening in people's lives to this extent. But you can also see the message that Boris Johnson is going to be projecting to people at home who may be thinking, well, hang on, isn't this too soon? I don't want to be, especially if you're vulnerable, walking around knowing that there'll be people with COVID potentially at your work or at your child's school or just walking around. And so he's going to be saying, look, this does not mean the pandemic is over. People should still be cautious. If you've got COVID, it's sensible if you stay at home, but the law is not going to mandate you to. I think what's going to be more controversial and what I expect members of the Cabinet and MPs this afternoon to be asking questions about is, should we be getting rid of testing then? Because if people can't test, they then can't find out if they have COVID. And we'll be interested to see what exemptions are going to be put in place this afternoon, where testing is going to be wound down, but will key workers, for example, get tests? We haven't had an answer to that yet. I expect that there will be something for the government to announce on that. Boris Johnson will be telling everybody what the new rules are this afternoon at a press conference. We expect the scientists to be with him, be looking out for whether their message is the same as his message.
OK, tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Yeah. Looking forward to it, including what he said about Partygate. It'd be interesting to get your take on that. Before that, though, let's bring you the very latest from, I've just got my notes here, actually, about Dr. Salia Ashan. She's an emergency medicine doctor currently working in intensive care. She's going to be with us very shortly indeed. Before that, let's get some more on our top story now. And the Prime Minister is expected to set out how England will live with COVID today as Downing Street outlines the lifting of all remaining restrictions. Let's bring in Dr. Salia Ashan, an emergency medicine doctor, in just a moment. But first, here's Emma Birchley in Leicester. Hi, Emma. Update us on the situation there.
Well, if you cast your mind back to the summer of 2020, as the rest of us were gearing up for our first haircut for months and a chance to go back to the pub or out for a meal here in Leicester, they were facing the toughest restrictions of all, the first place in the country to go into a local lockdown. So as a of the country today, they will be listening to what the had.
It does look as though the doctor wants to get on air, doesn't it? Here she is now, an emergency medicine doctor. Hello to you, doctor. Sorry about the confusion. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. How do you feel about these restrictions being lifted probably by the end of the week?
I'm really nervous about that, if I'm brutally honest. I know we were about to hear about Leicester being one of the first areas in the UK to be plunged into quite a harsh lockdown. What I don't want to see, and I'm sure what many other people don't want to see, is a flip-flop backwards and forwards into, hey, guess what, it's all over, we can go forth and live as normal, to then harsh lockdown because we've let the virus out. We know it's still mutating. We were lucky with Omicron. We anticipated it being a serious strain that could cause many deaths. We were lucky this time. It's not necessarily going to be the same with the next mutation, and there will be a new mutation. I'm deeply concerned. I'll be super interested to hear what the scientists are going to be saying lined up with Boris Johnson today, because frankly, we've not really heard from them. We have heard from Boris. I don't think this is living with COVID. I think this is living with Boris. We've had him for as long as we've had the pandemic. I was reflecting on that today. We've had to deal with both. And the way that the pandemic in the UK has been managed by Boris, I welcome the independent investigation that's going to be, an inquiry that's going to be looking into his handling. I'm concerned.
PM's expected to tell MPs that the vaccine programme, testing and new treatments that are available, including, I think it's Parlovid, one of the drugs that you can take if you've got COVID or if you've contracted COVID, are all going to help keep the public safe. Why is he wrong?
I think this is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We had a schedule that had been carefully thought through, a timing and a time plan carefully thought through. And Boris Johnson has brought it forward by about a month. I'm not sure entirely why. We've still got a situation where we've got 1 in 20 people infected, including Her Majesty the Queen, with COVID. Why the rush? I can't help but think with Boris Johnson, every decision that he makes, you've got to couple with, is this a political move with him trying to save his seat? Obviously, we know that the majority of his Tory backbenchers are supportive of this plan. It really, really muddies the water when you're actually, from a scientific and a healthcare perspective, trying to think of what's best for the nation, not what's best for politics. What I'm this is the scenario that I'm concerned about. Imagine we already have about 73,000 people within the NHS who are not vaccinated. 30,000 of them are exempt. If we get to a place, and I know this is still open to discussion, but it is important, if we have a place where people are not required to test and they are not required to stay at home should they be ill, or even just be positive with COVID, not even displaying signs and symptoms, I'd be very, very concerned about people coming into work. Now, a large majority of people who work in the NHS are agency staff. They are not under the same restrictions as full-time employers within the NHS. They work through agencies. They do not have pensions. They do not have sick pay. How are we going to prevent people who are positive with COVID, but we don't know, coming in to an environment where there are sick, vulnerable patients? That is a disaster.
We have to it's been 2 years, we have to let the rest of the country get back to normality eventually, don't we?
I agree. My gosh, there is no one more. I'm actually off work at the moment, having a break, because the intensity of what we have faced on the front line has been immense. Absolutely normality, but our world has changed. We've learned a huge amount about COVID and how to come to this place where we are right now, where we are losing less and less people. It hasn't gone away. There are measures that we need to put in place to properly live with COVID. We're talking about proper ventilation in schools. We're talking about measures to support people who are unwell. with adequate sick pay. We know that there are 20 million people within the UK right now who are not covered by sick pay. These are all the measures we need to put in place to live with COVID, not pretending that it doesn't exist, because it will, unfortunately. It's not me being a crystal ball rose. Scientifically, we know that we will possibly be having another strain, possibly. We have absolutely no guarantee on knowing whether it will be less or more virulent. So with guarantee, we know that another mutation will come. And what we're actually doing now is helping that along its way by throwing away all the restrictions all in one go. Everyone go forth and mix. I was reading about a report on...
I'm so sorry, we've run out of time. I'm sorry, you were going to go on to make another point, but hopefully we'll see you again soon and we'll discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you. In other news, the Beijing Winter Olympics has officially closed with fake snow, strict COVID-19 restrictions and a doping scandal hitting the headlines. Tom's standing by in Beijing for the last time in a while on this story, although we've got the Paralympics to look forward to, of course. Tom, Great Britain didn't do as well as they might have hoped. How do China feel that the Games went more generally?
Morning, Kay. I think China will be really happy with how it went. They saw it off last night with another spectacular ceremony. They are good at that. You'd expect them to be able to control that. But from the start, these games have been pretty controversial. You mentioned the fake snow. It just doesn't snow here in Beijing. We did get a bit of snowfall, but not nearly enough to host a Winter Olympics. There was that. Kamila Valieva, the Russian teenager who returned a positive test for a sample taken before the Olympics. That still needs to be figured out because she won team gold at the start of the Games with the Russian Olympic Committee. So what happens to that? What happens to the US and Japan, who are also who are beaten by the Russian Olympic Committee, and that will rumble on. And then there was the political side to all this. There was the diplomatic boycotts from the West over what they say are human rights abuses in China. And China met those criticisms head on. It featured an athlete from Xinjiang as part of its opening ceremony. We had an official recently say that everything was happening in Xinjiang was a lie when it came to these allegations of forced labour. We also saw an appearance from Peng Shuai, the Olympian herself, the tennis player who'd accused a high-ranking Chinese Communist Party official of sexual assault. She was paraded, apparently, for the cameras. So there was a lot of controversy. And then the other bit of this was, of course, a COVID Olympics. And I have to say, having been here, the whole time, it hasn't felt like an Olympic city. There are two separate Beijings, really, the Olympic bubble and Beijing. The two don't meet. So it hasn't been a lot of fun. It hasn't been very festive, but it has been very controlled, and that's what China likes.
OK, thank you. Let's take you back to Ukraine now, and overnight the White House has confirmed it has agreed in principle to a summit with Russia over the crisis. So as long as Ukraine is not invaded. The summit was proposed by France's President Macron after two lengthy phone calls with President Putin yesterday. Joining us now, General Lord Richard Dannett, the former Chief of the Defence Staff. Hello to you, my Lord. Thank you for joining us again. We've been chatting quite a lot lately. Where do you think we are compared to last time we chatted?
Well, Kay, good morning. I think we can take a crumb of comfort from the overnight news that President Macron, interceding on behalf of the European Union, because of course France holds the presidency at the present moment, would appear to have achieved some conditional agreement that there could be a summit between President Biden and Vladimir Putin on the important condition that the Russians don't invade. Well, I think we said all the way along that talking is far better than fighting. So I think we should feel a degree of encouragement about that. But I think what Vladimir Putin really has to remember, and we've said this so many times, Kay, is that he's in a pretty strong position, or Putin's in quite a strong position, while he's got a large number of troops on the border, while he's threatening, he's bullying, he's intimidating, people are talking to him. But if he crosses that line, if he attacks in an unprovoked fashion, then he will go from someone people want to talk to someone they absolutely don't want to talk to. Russia will come under huge sanctions, come under huge pressure, and Russia and Putin will very much go into the category of the pariahs of the 21st century.
We know that Russia has extended military drills that were due to end yesterday. How does that fit in with diplomacy?
Well, I think it's another tactic to keep the pressure on the West. I mean, I think the interesting thing is, apparently it was a very long phone conversation between President Macron and Vladimir Putin over the last 24 hours. Big question is, what were they talking about? We know that Russia has put certain demands on NATO, that NATO pulls back from other Eastern European countries. Well, NATO is not going to do that. The issue, therefore, turns on Ukraine. What position will Putin try and demand that the West takes about Ukraine? I would imagine that what he will want is an assurance that Ukraine will not, and perhaps never, join NATO. In our previous conversations, Kay, I said that I personally think that is the right thing, that we should support Ukraine as an independent country, but thinking that Ukraine could join NATO with the very special place that Russians feel about Ukraine, I think is a provocation too far. So it may well be that the losers out of this are Ukraine, are the Ukrainians, and their aspiration to join NATO. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't be on good relations with Ukraine from the West, good trading relations, good defense relations. But that's very separate from full-blooded membership of NATO.
What is he trying to achieve, in your opinion, by speaking a lot with the French, almost 2 hours yesterday on the phone with President Macron? President Macron's been to Moscow as well. President Schultz, Chancellor Scholz has also been to Moscow. And yet when the Brits went, they were given short shrift. Divide and rule?
Well, of course, this is one of the things that we've been saying right at the outset, that all the things that and the operations that Vladimir Putin has mounted in recent years, from the annexation of Crimea to a big cyber attack on Estonia and other threatening moves that they've made, he wants to split the harmony of the West, split the harmony of NATO. So saying one thing to one and one thing to another is a tactic in his mind whereby he can break the unity. But so far, it's not really been working for him, because against the possibility of a major armed incursion invasion by Russia of Ukraine, the West is still speaking with one voice. But if he extends the pressure, if he extends the period, then other national interests may well arise. You mentioned Germany. I mean, Germany is in a very difficult position over the Russian gas pipeline issue. Can Germany really afford to ditch the Nord Stream 2 project? I probably don't think it can. So by keeping this going, he is hoping to promote splits in the West. And I think this is where Western diplomats and statesmen have got to be very careful. If they don't watch it, there will be those splits and he will become even stronger.
I don't know if you've seen your morning papers yet, a lot of them carrying pictures of Russian tanks with a Z on the side. And the inference from some is that that means that they are battle ready. Have you ever seen that before?
Well, it's a tactic, well, not a tactic, a procedure which we've used in the past. If you think back to the Gulf War, there was an inverted V on the side of British and Allied armoured vehicles, which is really all part of battlefield identification. I mean, no, there's no getting away from it. They are making very full preparations for a major armed incursion. It's been reported over recent days that all the infrastructure, the logistics, the medical support is all there. So there's no getting away from the fact that the Russians have geared themselves up and are completing to gear themselves up for a major incursion. But I think the other thing, though, Kay, which we've got to watch is what's going on in eastern Ukraine. This business about Russian citizens being helped to evacuate because there is the threat of a Ukrainian offensive. Now, this is so much hogwash. It looks very scripted, but it's the kind of circumstances which we may find Russia claiming, and therefore that's their justification to make a major incursion as a counter-offensive against a Ukrainian offensive. Personally, I think it's rubbish. I think most people know it's rubbish. But as Donald Trump showed, you can go on broadcasting rubbish, fake news, and sometimes you get away with it. Not always.
Okay. My lord, we must leave it there, but it's always great to talk to you. I'm sure we'll speak again during the course of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. More on the crisis now. And while most airlines have stopped flying over Ukraine, Air Baltic have actually put on extra flights to Kiev. Let's find out why, should we? Martin Gauss is their CEO. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. What do you know that the other airlines don't?
When there was the request from a couple of governments that their citizens should leave immediately, we had a much higher demand, so we added flights last week. These were the extra flights, but we are flying our regular flights up to 2 times a day to Kiev, and also we fly to Vilnius and Odessa, and we are evaluating the situation, of course, as everybody else. But currently, there is no restriction for us to fly, and therefore we continue serving the Ukraine.
And what criteria do you use to assess risk?
The same criteria everybody else uses. Air Baltic was actually the first airline stopping to fly to Belarusian airspace, and we caused, I guess, later on the restrictions there because we decided that is not safe anymore. So the same criteria, all the international services, and then we decide to stop if we consider it not safe anymore.
What would need to change for you to decide that you don't want to fly in Kiev airspace or Ukrainian airspace anymore?
Any restriction of the airspace, any advice from any authority that the airspace is not safe, then we would stop immediately. And as we are very close to that airspace, we can contact our aircraft. What we have done as a precaution, all of our aircraft are taking the fuel to return, and we could return even in the air. So we do this all the time as we are flying to a lot of destinations, and we've done that with Belarus as the first airline. We would do it also here if it's needed.
What's your advice to passengers who are anxious about flying over Ukrainian airspace?
We see currently a demand from both ends. So there's passengers flying to the Ukraine and out of the Ukraine. And of course, somebody who does not want to travel should not travel. But we are providing a connectivity not only to Latvia and Lithuania, we also then have connecting flights. And there's a lot of people who want to fly in and out. And as long as that is safe, we continue to do so.
Okay. What impact is all of this uncertainty having on the airline?
Of course, what is never good is any conflict. And we are already circumnavigating the Belarusian airspace. And all these restrictions, of course, are not good. We're just coming out of a pandemic as airline industry. And we would, of course, wish that the negotiation or the discussions which might happen this week lead to a de-escalation. For our industry, it's never good to have any conflict in the world.
Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Thank you. Just hearing within the last few seconds from the Kremlin, they're telling us that President Putin and President Macron have agreed there is need to continue dialogue on Ukraine. We know that the two leaders spoke for 1 hour and 45 minutes on the telephone yesterday. This was them meeting in Moscow a couple of weeks ago. They have certainly been chatting quite a lot over the last couple of weeks or so, as has the German Chancellor, Chancellor Scholz. He's also been to Moscow, was concerned that it looks as though an invasion was very much on the cards, some suggesting it even had already started. But this is the latest from the Kremlin via the Reuters news agency, saying that the Kremlin has saying that President Putin and President Macron have agreed there is a need to continue dialogue on the Ukraine. I mean, any way you look at that, it is positive news at this stage. They spoke, we're hearing from the TASS news agency, that President Putin and President Macron spoke on the phone for a second time, twice on Sunday.